pase, pierna derecha, directo al arco, ¡golazo! ¡Golazo!
The world of football with a soccer perspective. This is Soccer Today with Duane, Rollins and Kevin Laramee, live on the Sports Podcasting Network.
Good day, good night. Welcome to Soccer Today for March, Tuesday, March 27th, 2018. Joining us on the line right now, Gavin Day, back from Spain, back from his trip to watch Canadian men's national team battle New Zealand to a 1-0 win. Back on this side of the pond, of course, Duane Rollins on the line, and it's Duane's 1000th show overall combined about soccer, and that is impressive. Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning. Yeah. 1,000. I don't feel a day over 700 for the record. Going back a long time to the Ben Rycroft days through Ben Knight. My mother once got me a hat that said my name isn't Ben in those early days because it was Ben Rycroft, Ben Knight, and myself. But nonetheless, it's been a long journey. Gavin, you were there. You've had a long, strange journey over the years as well. You've covered the Canadian national teams as close as anyone, done a lot of trips. I think some listeners might find it interesting. Where exactly was that thing played on the weekend? Because it looked like it was in the middle of like a field in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, it was a plane, a train, and an automobile away. I mean, I flew to Madrid, took a train to the coast, or to Murcia, the city. The game was in Murcia, the province, excuse me. But it was in a small city called San Pedro del Pinatar, which is it's essentially a Spanish tourist city. So right now it's pretty much empty, but everyone has their vacation homes who it's going to be busy in a couple of weeks soon enough. But it was at this sporting complex that had a gym and pools and stuff, and then soccer fields in that little stadium where the game take place. And I mean, when I was there, in addition to Canada, New Zealand, there were youth teams from Brazil, England, the U.S., and France. And when Canada trained at the stadium the day before, the U.S. and French U20 teams played, and one Zinedine Zidane was on hand, which was kind of cool. So, but it was literally, it was out there.
Well, the world is a small world indeed. You find Zidane in the middle of coastal Spain. Awesome. All right, so let's get that out of the way and talk about the game itself. What did it mean? Did it mean anything more because it was John Herdman's first game?
I think that's the reason why I went, is that here's this guy who's coached the women's teams to back-to-back bronze medals at an Olympics, and suddenly taking over the men's team, which doesn't happen. And when I make the pitch to go cover, that was certainly the angle I was going for. And I mean, for Herdman, obviously, I know it was something special to get that first game, but in sort of the grand scheme of things, this was more a, hi, nice to meet you, good to get to know you, this is where we're going, this is what we plan to do, and this is how we plan to do it kind of event. I mean, New Zealand were also in a similar situation with the new coach, not their top team either. So you look nothing into it. I believe I wrote for one piece, it was something like, I called it a admittedly very small hurdle that Canada overcame.
Well, yeah, the small hurdle, the one goal by St. Ricketts. And, of course, coming off this game, one player who made his quote-unquote debut for Canada, it wasn't official, it's not a cap, but still counts as a debut, impressed a lot of people this side of the pond, because we don't see Liam Miller quite often. You have seen Liam Miller live. How impressed were you, if you were?
Yeah, I mean, he was a kid. In the first 10 to 15 minutes, it was nervy times for Canada. They didn't start the best of the two, but when they got going, it was largely thanks to getting the ball up that left side. And Miller, with a quick little move one way, quick little move another way, he won some space, would get some crosses in, get the ball to the byline, that kind of thing. So, at 18 years old, he was maybe Canada's most productive player attacking-wise. And, you don't want to, obviously, he's 18, he's in the Liverpool Academy. You don't want to jump the gun by any stretch of the imagination, because we've done that many, many times before with young players. But, for one game, he looked right in there. Herdman says he's good enough. You don't worry about the age anymore. And so Canada could very well not be active until September's game against the U.S. Virgin Islands, and would not be surprised to see Miller included again.
Well, you just mentioned that Canada might not be in action. There's no friendlies scheduled until the debut of the League of Nations first year, the seeding kind of tournament. What is your thought on a few friendlies and no games during the World Cup?
Yeah, I mean, it's just a tough time, I think, to schedule friendlies I'm not sure when the official sort of windows are. And yeah, I suppose there could be a time during the World Cup where they could get something, but it would likely involve, jetting off to somewhere near Russia where, your guys in Europe are out of season. Your guys in North America might not want to go that far, or teams might not want to see players, go that far. Of course, they would have to release them, obviously, but it would likely be some sort of ramshackle Canadian squad. I think back to 2010 when I covered my first Canadian game really abroad, when I covered the Argentina game, and they were phoning up Daniel Imhoff, who had retired not long before, and said, we need players, we've got to get players in. And then they had that second game against Venezuela where they had a whole bunch of new guys in there. So I don't know how productive it would be. I know I wouldn't be surprised if they did sort of shoehorn one in there, but it's easier said than done. So I'm honestly working under the assumption that they won't get any more games, but we'll see how things play out.
Maybe an under-23 camp might be worthwhile or something like that. But nonetheless, you're right. It's purgatory. We're calling it the purgatory time. If you're not in the World Cup, you just are biding time to have something to play for again. Gavin, speaking of something to play for again, I haven't spoken to you about the Nations League, as they're calling it for CONCACAF. I haven't got your take on it. Well, what is your thoughts on Nations League?
I think it's fantastic. I mean, Canada's always been hamstrung by fewer international games, or not international games, fewer competitive games than everyone else in CONCACAF and maybe the world, because they have no Central American Championship, no Caribbean Championship. So whenever the Caribbean Championship would play every 2 years or whatever it is, you'd see these small countries shooting up the ranks when, Jamaica would crush St. Lucia, and those ranking points are about 2.5 times more than a friendly. So Canada's ranking would be hamstrung by that. And what it does is it makes it easier, first scheduling-wise. Canada's going to be playing months in advance, which how often do we get a chance to say that? Usually it's like, oh, yeah, there's a game in 2 months. Oh, okay. So it makes the scheduling easier. Canada's not going to be playing halfway around the world, across 10 different time zones just to get games. And so from that point of view, it makes things so much easier for fans, for organizers, for the players themselves. They have an idea of where they're going to be at a particular time, and also, get those opportunities to get young players cap tied if you want them to, get them into official games if you need to.
Just real quickly before I ask my main question here, do you know if the League of Nations games, Nations League games, will cap tie players because they're technically qualifiers for the Gold Cup?
I don't know exactly, but considering it is an official FIFA-sanctioned competition now, I would believe they would be until it's proved otherwise. That's the theory I'm going under.
All right, so Liam Miller, welcome to the camp. Anyway, all right, my last question here before Kevin jumps back in. We talked about a bit this last week, but I'm not sure whether the listeners heard your answer fully just because of the connection issues we have. So I'll ask it again. Your perspective as someone who covered John Herdman a lot during his days with the women's national team and has now seen him managing the men. Did you see anything different in his approach? Did you see anything different in his training techniques, or was it more of the same?
Yeah, I mean, I honestly got a very small glimpse of what they were doing. They were trying to, of course, be protective, as always, of what they have, because, of course, I have a track record of spouting secret nonsense. Anyway, kidding. I'm joking. Anyway, from what I did see, it was all very much the same structure, 11v11 stuff. Ended with set pieces. There were from what I gathered, there were plenty of meetings in advance. I don't think he's going to change sort of operates. He obviously does have to change based on the length of many of these camps, where he doesn't get them for weeks on end. He gets them for a few days. So I think that's where he's going to change, is that he's going to be in contact with a lot of players in advance, getting them on programs online so that they can continue to work together, even if it's not on a soccer field. But he was out there yelling as he normally would on the sidelines for most of the game, either him or goalkeeper coach Simon Eady, who was in this camp after being with the women's side. I'm not sure how often he'll be in the camp, but it looked very much like a John Herdman camp, sort of by the books. Obviously, I didn't get to see behind the scenes, but the new addition this time around was the drone hovering around the field, which was funny to see.
Yeah, no, it's always funny. It's always worrisome too. Like the drone, okay, it has a logo on it. It's controlled by the team. It's fine. But no, when you were talking about last week too, the training of the Canadian men's national team under John Herdman, which you thought was very similar to the training sessions you've seen John Herdman do with the Canadian women's national team. Now, you mentioned him on the sideline and how he was vocal and vociferous like he usually is. Is there a difference in not necessarily the demeanor or how he handles himself on the sideline or how the communication pathways with the players is, but is there a difference? Is there a feeling of more importance or less importance, or it's just the same? Because if there's one thing we criticize when this whole thing happened, is the feeling of, oh, it's a promotion going from women to men. But in action, was it very similar, or did it feel like he had a promotion and did he take it more seriously?
No, I mean, I think for him, it's just a new challenge, and it just happens to be with the other Canadian senior soccer team. There was no feeling that this was a promotion in any stretch of the imagination. He talked about his time with the women being crucial to helping him understand Canadian players, full stop. And there was no step up, there was no move up, there was none of that talk. It was a new challenge, and he's well aware of what is not what's needed, but of the lack of success this men's program has had. And I just get the feeling that he's diving right in to see if he can prove that his coaching that's worked at other levels or at other teams, or other genders, works over with the men's. And hey, they're 1-0.
One thing I was wondering too, Gavin, is when we look at this starting 11, yes, Cal Lauren now plays for Besiktas, but just a few months removed from being a Major League Soccer player. Petrasso, Edwards on the bench, Piet to St. Ricketts. A lot of Canadian content who plays either in Canada or in what could be called our league, for now at least, Major League Soccer. Are you surprised in 2018 that there seemed to be some sort of revival of Canadian content in Major League Soccer helping Canadian men's national team?
Well, yeah. I mean, it is just great to see that there are Canadians who are either in MLS or former MLS products who go abroad. You look at Marcus Godinho, who came in off the bench. She's one who went to the TFC Academy. So I don't know if it's sort of a finally this is happening fully, but it might just be more down to Canadians who are. You look at Sam Piet, he's come back. He's not an academy product. He's come back, and I mean, you look at the impact and how many Canadian options they have. Even you look at the Ottawa Fury and how many Canadian options they have. So it's going to in fact be crucial. Come September when Canada goes into that U.S. Virgin Islands game, which, on paper is an easy game, but you take nothing for granted when you go play away in CONCACAF. And all of these guys playing North America side will be either wrapping up seasons or getting ready for playoffs. Meanwhile, the European-based players will just be essentially just starting their season. So those North American guys are going to have very key roles going in against the Virgin Islands because they're going to already be in top form. So it was great to see that most of the starting lineup played in Major League Soccer for sure, and that until such a time where there's a Canadian league playing alongside it. I think it'll still continue to be that way, that MLS will be where the Canadians go, and not just the Canadian teams, as we saw with the likes of the guys from LAFC and Teshuak and Dele and all of that.
Well, speaking of LAFC, Mark-Anthony Kaye is a guy that's really kind of come onto the scene in a little bit. Just quickly, what was your impression of his play?
First of all, I was impressed with how well-spoken he is. A very nice young man and very eloquent, and was able to talk about his experiences of grinding his way up through USL into MLS. And I think it was it just one half that he played, but he made himself felt. There was, I saw him sort of throw his weight around a little bit. He's sort of a lanky kind of guy, but he wasn't earth-shattering, but he was not out of his depth by any way. And it's really great to see his development over the last little bit, especially since I thought he put in some pretty good performances at the Gold Cup last year.
What's your sense on what Atiba Hutchinson's role on this team is going to be over the next year or so?
I'm not sure. From what I gathered is that he had to pull out with injury, but the transition is happening. Julian de Guzman is now finally gone. This is the first cycle with that, the first full cycle without Duane de Rosario. Atiba Hutchinson knows he's coming to an end. So if he's in, I think it will be to provide some quiet leadership to the likes of Samuel Piet and those other guys in the midfield. This is how we've done it. This is how you be a professional. This is how you could get to where maybe a higher level where I am. So in sort of a how John does sort of bring in players. He did, I believe, with the women's side too, to provide a little bit more leadership than maybe playing time. I remember Karina LeBlanc wouldn't always play in goal because that was Erin McLeod's position, but she was invaluable as a leader. So I could certainly see that happening. But knowing, if Atiba does sort of continue, knowing him as I do, he'll also want to perform. But I think there will be an element of leadership necessary if once he's in camps.
All right, we'll wrap with this one. Voyageurs, Canadian fans are cynical by their nature, are paranoid by their nature about players that when they don't show up. Anything to read into the fact that Lucas Cavallini was left off this roster, or was this just a case of a guy that was doing well in Mexico and leave well enough alone?
I'm not sure. Knowing, it's tough to comment on that just because, Cavallini's been a guy who's sort of had a passing fancy with the Canadian program. He's locked in. He can't go anywhere else. And I'll admit I didn't get a chance to talk to Herdman about this, but if he comes in, he has to be a team player. And, he can't be just sort of someone who comes in every so often when he wants to. So, if he continues to get called in, it would be as a guy who is saying, yeah, this is a priority for me. So for this camp, I wouldn't say anything into it. Herdman did say that coming up to September, they will need big guys. He didn't say names. He just said they will need guys on hand to play these competitive games. Club situations, injury situations aside, they will need the guys in. So once competitive games start, that's when I think we can maybe start to assess that what his role is going to be and whether or not he's committed to the Canadian side.
Gavin, just before we wrap up, I have one last question for you, Gavin. Is when you mentioned Samuel Piet, and we're talking about transition. And there's already a feeling where I am right now in Montreal that Samuel Piet will be the captain of the Montreal Impact starting next year and will be the new heir apparent of Patrice Bernier here in Montreal. On the national team side, is Samuel Piet the new Atiba Hutchinson?
I wouldn't say that. Atiba's another level still. And Piet may get there one day. They're very different players. Sammy is the grinder. He's fit into that de Guzman role more than anything. And he what I like about Sam's game is that he gets stuck in and he is not afraid to get the tackles in and throw his weight around a little bit. But I can see him being a future Canadian captain, to be sure. I've known him since he was 17, something like that, and he's just developed into a competent reliable player that will give his best every game. And so from that regard, he'll have a very senior role in the Canadian team. I think he's still only 23, so he's going to be around for a very long time. Whether or not he'll be a Hutchinson is another matter, but he'll be a very important player for years to come.
Gavin, thank you very much for your time today. Where can the listeners follow you on social media, and where can they read and listen to your work?
Well, that's it for me for a bit, for the national team until they, maybe get a game that I can cover again. I mean, my stuff was Sportsnet, the Canadian Press. I did a radio feature for CBC's The World this weekend on Saturday. But yeah, follow at Gavin L. Day. I tend to just sort of try to ham up jokes and stuff, but follow me along, and we'll see where I get to go to next, depending on where and when this team gets to play again.
Thank you very much for your time today, Gavin. We'll be right back after the break talking about bid books with Duane to celebrate his 100th shout.
You are listening to Soccer Today. Follow us on Twitter at SoccerTodaySPN and like our Facebook page, facebook.com/Sports Podcasting Network. You can find the podcast version of all the shows we do on iTunes, Apple Podcast, Google Play Store, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, and anywhere you get your podcast.
And we're back on Soccer Today. Duane Rollins with myself, Kevin Laramee. Duane, it's been 1,000 show combined for you. That's a lot of shows. That's a lot of shows.
It's about a month and a half of consecutive talk on soccer. So yeah,
24 hours a day.
Days.
24 hours a day, 37 days straight of soccer talk. Why not? Yeah. To celebrate your 1,000th show, you had a lot of reading to do yesterday. You went through the books. You went through the bid books. And what can you tell us to begin with about United 2026?
Well, the first thing I'll tell you is anyone who wants to read the bid books, just read the executive summaries. That's fine. That's all you really need to know. And there is some details in there that are interesting. You can find out specifically what identified parks there will be within each city in terms of their training facilities and all that. And we always talk about, we've talked about that in this show before, how we forget about that when we're trying to do a bid. It's like, oh, we have 20 stadiums. Well, you need more than 20 stadiums. You need to have, stadiums that are training facilities attached to them for each team, and so on and so forth. The United bid, a couple things jumped out. We learned where they plan to host the final. We learned where they plan to host the semifinals. We know the exact breakdown of how they decide they want to put the Canada and the Mexico games. Specifically, they will get each of Canada and Mexico will get 3 knockout games, 2 in 32 and 1 in 16, and none beyond that. So the latest that a Toronto or a Montreal or an Edmonton can host a game would be in the round of 16. There will be a single game hosted in the round of 16 in both Canada and Mexico, 2 in the round of 32, as I said. The other 7 games would be held in the group stage in the first month. They did confirm that they do plan to have a game in each country on opening day, specifically in Toronto would be the opening game in Canada. So that would be something that the city I'm in could look forward to. That would be a bit of an honor, I suppose.
Sorry, go ahead. I was going to say one thing that I really like. We're talking about Toronto is the attendance or the size of the capacity of BMO Field is valued at 40,000 in this bid books. And if you're looking at what's been said over the last few weeks, those will be permanent seating, and there would be another renovation to BMO Field, another expansion to BMO Field before 2026.
Yeah, that's not really shocking. They would probably do something with the north end, I suspect, is what they would do. There's a logical place you could put there. They did actually at one point take stands out, and they put some back in, but they could add to that. You could probably add a permanent second deck above the south end as well to get that up to 40,000 without too much infrastructure rip out. So nonetheless, that would be, hey, look, BMO's a nice little location now. And with this expansion on, I don't think there's anything wrong with them hosting World Cup games with this thing as it is. If they just add a few more seats to it, it would be a perfectly adequate stadium that would continue to draw after. TFC at 40,000 when they're not winning. I think there'd be empty seats, but that's
yeah, it's like a baseball stadium. There's always empty seats in a baseball stadium, but a few times a year, you need those 40-something. But you got an average of 25.
Yeah, it's there's empty seats now. I mean, they're winning. I mean, unless it's a nice summer day and they're playing someone big or it's a playoff game, it's going to be some empty seats spreading around there. But nonetheless, certainly I can see that. And the Argos are going to look hilarious in there at 40,000, but we'll leave that well enough alone.
Yeah. The Argos are not going to be part of the World Cup bid. So that's one thing, that's for sure.
Yeah. There was no indication that these are suggestions, obviously. These are not set in stone. It is up to FIFA to make that final decision. So the 3 games on the opening day, FIFA may say no. It's traditional that you have 1, so pick and choose. The one disappointment that came out to me, and I had heard that they had planned to sort of there's 3 major components, like 3 big things that happen for these World Cups. You have your draw. That's a big event. And you have your opening day, your first game, and then you have your final, obviously, your 3 biggest events attached to this. I had heard that they would split them up amongst 3 countries. Canada would get the draw. Not so according to this. Basically, everything not attached to games itself would not be in Canada, and Mexico would get some of that stuff. So I thought that was like ultimate junior partner stuff when it came to that, and it disappointed me as a Canadian. But
what we get out of this is we get the host spot, and we get renovations to the Southern Epic to BMO Field and to Commonwealth Stadium. That's what Canada gets with the World Cup. We get to play in the World Cup, and we got money to put a new painted coat on the Big O, a new retractable roof on the Big O in Montreal, some new seats in Toronto, and another painted coat on the Commonwealth Stadium in Edmonton.
Yeah, and maybe they go back to grass there permanently. We'll see. Look, the one thing I would really like to see is an absolute 100% confirmation that all 3 teams would get in. I have not seen that in a way that satisfies me to not think that this is going to be the ultimate burn, is that we're going to get this World Cup and we're going to base all of our stuff around it, and then suddenly FIFA's going to go, oh, no, Canada, you need to qualify. And if you look at the Monaco bid, they pump up the fact that
Morocco, yeah.
Some of the Morocco, sorry, I said Monaco. They pump up the lack of soccer history in Canada as part of the anti, their support for their bid. They're more of a football culture. They say it carefully, but that's what they're saying.
But soccer's been present in Canada before Morocco. So this is just bullcrap, because soccer is more than 100 years old in Canada. The Canadian Soccer Association itself, so that's not the sport, that's just the governing body of the sport here in Canada, is over 100 years old. Which means the sport's been here the same time it was over there in England, because they brought it over here. Not in Morocco first, so that one's a lie.
Yeah, well, it's all about politics and rhetoric. The Russian representative came out yesterday and said that we know that, and this was kind of hilarious because he included Mexico as this. We know that the football is not real over there, is what he said, and he included Mexico in that. Mexico's better than Russia right now. Anyway,
they pretty much always have been. Like, Russia was only good for a few time, and now if we look at hindsight, we might know why they were good at that point. Like, doping were not necessarily testing that much back then, and
this is going to be a battle royale to the end, is what this comes down more and more. The Morocco bid really does push up the antes a lot. Their entire bid is, if you read the book, is almost entirely based on what they offer that the U.S., Canada, and Mexico don't. Like, it's almost an anti-bid. It's like, if you don't like the U.S., come here. And they talk about how it's safer in Morocco, which I don't know if it is or not, but whatever. They point to like high-profile gun crimes in the U.S. and say that makes it a more dangerous location for them. I have no doubt that the stadiums would be perfectly safe anywhere they host a World Cup. So it's kind of a hyperbolic sort of situation that you're arguing there. So they're very subtly trying to, not even very subtly, they're kind of overtly trying to play up the anti-American side of things. They're also, on a less sort of controversial way, they are playing up the fact that it's a condensed bid, that it's an accessible bid, that it's accessible from Europe, that fans can go there and can travel between stadiums more easily, the cheaper, and those things are legitimate. And I do understand why you would play that up as your bid, and if that's something that really matters to someone, that's something that they should play up. The question I would have when it comes to Morocco is, like, is it big enough to host 48 teams?
They have enough money. Can you prove that the stadiums you will have to build to host this World Cup will be used after? is the Moroccan Premier League, if it's even called that, I know it's not called that, but is the Moroccan Premier League big enough to have those teams take ownership of those stadiums and use them? It's all well and good to build superb structures with oil money and a lot of sponsors. We got 20 new stadiums in Morocco. This is awesome. 2 years later, there's grass, there's trees growing in the middle of stadiums. Yeah, we don't want to see this. And for the first 48 teams World Cup, if there's one thing FIFA does not want, is what happened in Athens in 2004 for the Olympics, and then becomes a tarnish on the track records of the Olympic program and the IOC because of how they handled the non-sustainability of those games, especially for the venues. If Morocco, the first ever 48 teams World Cup, creates white elephants with their stadium and just a few years after is bankrupt and the economical situation gets even worse than it is at this moment, it doesn't give a good example for the other 48 teams World Cup that will happen after that. And I do feel that because of big sponsors, Coca-Cola's of this world, the McDonald's, the big American companies, they're going to have their say in there too. And I feel that it's going to be, like you say, a battle royale. But this decision will also dictate where we're just talking smoke and mirrors, when we're talking about more sustainability, more transparency, and a certain amount of working with what we got already and embellishing it and not just building everything from the ground up. Or was this just shoveling of clouds and we still go with the most amount of money and corruption?
Yeah, the question, I think the other thing FIFA wants to avoid would be another Qatar, in the sense that they're reinventing what the bid is after they've won it, right? Like Qatar, well, yeah, we can host it in the summer. Oh, no problem. And well, now it's a November World Cup, and that no one is happy about that, right? So is Morocco big enough? Does it have the ability to put this thing on? Does it have the ability to host 48 teams? Or are they going to come back to FIFA in 3 years after winning this bid and go, you know what? We've been talking to the Spanish, and we need to have a couple stadiums up there. And the Algerians have decided that they want to host a group as well. So we're actually going to make this less, that sort of thing. I could see that happening because this is a big undertaking. And I'm not suggesting that places like this don't deserve the opportunity to host and bid for World Cups. They certainly do. But with this 48-team thing, I think it's not realistic for a single country like Morocco to host it. I think that they, moving forward, like Algeria, Tunisia, Morocco bid would make sense. A Northern African bid unified. Like that is kind of the model that I think that they're going to need to go forward, which is, I think, sort of a trump card that the United bid right now has. This needs to be the model moving forward because it's not really that easy to host that many teams. I don't think FIFA is going to downsize this event as much as every time I think of 48 teams, I just want to scream. It's like such a ridiculous number. But at any rate,
Yeah. Well, it makes sense though when it's 48, but not out of 60. At least it's 48 out of 204, which is a bit like, at least you're like, okay, 1/4 of the nations of the entire world that are part of FIFA qualifies for the final, which gives you, like, yes, it makes for maybe too big of a field to narrow down to one champion, but it does give hope, gives importance, and it gives that, that famous, I'm still in it. Oh, look at us. We made it all in top 8, right? It gives us a chance, and it might be the only way that Canada comes in. If there's 48 teams, maybe then we'll qualify.
I don't like 48 because it's an awkward number. I don't like 3-team groups. They're going to create games that are going to be awful. The way to do this, if they wanted to expand it, would have been to create a play-in round where you have 32 teams that play off for the last 16 spots to make it a 32-team World Cup, because 32 was a very logical, workable number. You have 8 groups, 2 survivors, 16 go. It made sense.
48 could work too, Duane. Just how you separate your group. Make 6 groups of 4 instead of 8 groups of 3. You separate the field in 2 brackets, 48, 24. It would have made sense too. It's just the 3 teams group. But there's nothing we can do about that.
Yeah, I mean, that's anyway. Canada's going to get this host spot and get 2 lousy games, but at any rate, that's neither here nor there. No, look, the more you read these bid books, the less sense Morocco makes. But then you take a step back and go, this isn't about sense. This isn't about logic. This is about geopolitics. And when you get into the geopolitics argument, it's going to be a battle royale to the end. I don't think that the United Bid by any means is out of this, but it's not going to be easy, and they're going to need to fight for every single vote because this might not be close. And the other thing that came out the other day is that there's a third option on the ballot, and this is interesting, and this actually might help the United Bid when I think about it. The third option that's going to be on the ballot is neither reopen bid process, and that may allow some nations that don't like the idea, that can't sell in their nation the idea of voting for the U.S., which is perceived to be the bid, the opportunity to not vote for the U.S., but also sort of to, by not voting for Morocco, to acknowledge that that's the best place to go. So that third option might help the United Bid more than it will help Morocco, I think.
Yeah, we'll see. That'll be interesting. Before we wrap today's show, Duane, I have a few questions for you. It's your 1000th show about soccer. And I'm going to ask you a few questions about soccer. Duane, what?
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. What is the one interview, the one conversation, either with a player or with a character of the sports we cover, that you're the most proud of?
I think that my favorite interview that I've done on any of the shows that I did was the Herculez Gomez interview, because it was very timely. I was the only one to get it. Herculez Gomez is such a compelling individual anyway. It was hard to set up. I had to work a lot to get it, and we made it happen. And it was something that really spoke to a lot of fans here, because it was very specific to something that you weren't going to get. You weren't going to get on Sportsnet, and that's no disrespect to the people that work at those networks, because really, what I was interviewing him about was comments that he made that were directed towards fans and attitudes and things like that weren't necessarily going to be as big a story to non-hardcore soccer fans. So I think that Herc Gomez interview was one of my favorites. I enjoyed all of the Julian de Guzman interviews we did. I wasn't the main person on this, but watching Rycroft do a lot of the work he did with the match fixing back using It's Called Football as one of the jumping off points, he ultimately got involved with the CBC to take that over the finish line. That was something that I think that we did, that he deserves a lot of credit for, and that that I was proud to help him in the small way that I did. That was certainly something that stands out. I remember Rohan Ricketts. I've told the story many times before, that in the poor guy, he had been released by TFC in the morning, but TFC hadn't informed him, and we had already scheduled him for an interview. And I asked him about the release, and he was not yet aware that he'd been released. So I actually informed Rohan Ricketts on It's Called Football that he'd been released. So that was fun.
Oh my God! Can you imagine the reaction? What? What's that, Duane? What are you saying? Oh, yeah. Give me a second. I need to call my wife, and I'm going to answer your question after. Oh, man. Can you imagine the malaise? The other thing I was wondering, Duane, is the sport of soccer has come a long way since the beginning of It's Called Football 2009 in Canada and in North America. We went through hard times it was in Toronto. How does it feel now? What is your view of soccer in North America in 2018 after 1000 show?
This is why I'm more positive when it comes to national team and when it comes to CAS issues, CSA issues, CAS, I don't know what that came from, CSA issues, is because I do see the progress, and I was around before. I remember prior to TFC, I had moved back. I'd lived out east from 2001 until 2005. I moved back to Ontario in 2006, so just the year before TFC. And I remember doing work for the Guelph Mercury, driving around. I was covering a CIS football games, Guelph Griffins versus, I don't know, McMaster or something. So I was covering that game for the Mercury in Guelph. And I was sitting in the parking lot at the end of that game, and Roger Lajoie from the Fan 590 was taking calls about this new soccer team that was starting in Toronto and whether we thought that it had any chance of success. And I never call call-ins when it comes to the Fan 590 and stuff like that, because it's not something that I'm really interested in. I don't even like listening to them sometimes, but I was compelled that day for whatever reason to call in, and I got on the air and I had a conversation with Roger Lajoie, who is a very well-known Toronto radio personality, about this Toronto soccer thing. And I remember having this very earnest conversation with him about how I felt there was a chance, and I gave all the reasons why, and I told him that I was involved in the soccer community and that I knew people in the soccer community. I knew people very excited about this, but that we were also worried because we knew very well that if this one failed, we're never going to get another chance again. And that was exactly what I felt at that time. There's a lot of trepidation about TFC starting because we knew that this was the last chance. And then, you flash forward to that opening day when all that sound in the stadium, everything going on, and walking in and seeing all of those people there and saying literally out loud, as I've said before, where the hell did these people come from? Because they weren't there before. But at any rate, being excited about that and going through that amazing summer of 2007, the only summer that I was not regularly doing anything journalistic around it and just experiencing it and absorbing it, it changed me and it made me have these expectations of this positive, this potential amazing growth of it. It's been slow and it's been frustrating since then, but I do see the growth. I do see more players. I see stuff like League One Ontario. I see all sorts of potential. I do see a better pathway now, a better talent level now across the board for Canadian players than I did 10 years ago, certainly than I did 20 years ago. The problem, of course, is the other nations aren't standing still, and so our progress vis-a-vis them is not necessarily as dramatic as it is vis-a-vis ourselves. So that's where I stand on it. I also see stuff like what we've done, what It's Called Football did, was unique at the time. Now there's lots of guys doing this. There's lots of voices out there. There's lots of mainstream coverage out there. Soccer has become just another sport in Toronto now. It's just part of the platform. If you're a 17-year-old kid, you don't remember a time when soccer wasn't part of the sporting landscape, and you don't question it. Whereas when I was 17, it was like you were a soccer fan and you stood out, and people made fun of you for that, and people dismissed you for that. That doesn't exist anymore. So that's what I've seen evolve, and I've been along for a bit of the journey, so that's kind of fun. I talk a lot and listen to myself talk a lot, so that's what I've done, and I apologize deeply for 1,000 times in your ears, folks. But if you want to support me for 1,000 more, patreon.com, Sports Podcasting Network.
Exactly, and we're going to finish the show with this on patreon.com/Sports Podcasting Network. You can help us continue to evolve, continue to bring the podcasting game to the next level. How many podcasters do you know that has a studio like we do now? I don't know any. Do you know any? I don't know. But what I'm saying is, if you're standing still, you're actually going backwards. It's all about upwards and onwards and moving forward. It's not about how many times you get knocked down. It's how many times you get back up and keep moving forward. On those beautiful words of a certain Balboa, I'm going to wish you all a great soccer, and especially if you like what we do, you like to continue to see the evolution of soccer podcasts, of soccer coverage in this country, and you want to have your say in it, patreon.com/Sports Podcasting. Exciting times on the Canadian soccer side. A brand new show ball. A brand new evolution of a show starting next week at some point. Next week, we still need to do the scheduling, but Duane Rollins, myself, and a voice that you heard before on the network here, Keaton Robbins, is now jumping on board to help us bring you the best Canadian Premier League coverage, bar none, on podcast and radio form. And that will start next week for patrons only on patreon.com/Sports Podcast Network. And as always, for Duane Rollins, I'm Kevin Laramee. You can follow Duane's on Twitter at 24th Minute and myself at Kev Laramee. We will be back tomorrow, 10 a.m. for more soccer talk. And until then, have a great soccer.
You can find the podcast version of all the shows we do on iTunes, Apple Podcast, Google Play Store, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, and anywhere you get your podcast.